we'll have some folks from states join us in the panel discussion reflection. So without too much further introduction, I will get started and share with you some of the work that we've been doing. So just as some background on the State Non-Credit Data Project, it's a project that's based at Rutgers at the Education and Employment Research Center. It's been going on for several years now. We started off in the earlier phase of this project, working with states that had fairly established data systems, Iowa, Louisiana, and Virginia, and kind of just taking an inventory of the non-credit data that they've been collecting, knowing that this is an important area of growth for states in terms of building out their data systems. We wanted to work with some states to document what had been done and look at kind of the kinds of programs and courses that they were collecting information on and begin to build towards a data taxonomy that could be shared across states. So that was the first version of the taxonomy that we released. And more recently, we've been working with a second group of states that present a wider range of perspectives and governance structures and institutional entities. And we're thrilled to have Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, South Carolina, and Tennessee all working with us to document their efforts in collecting non-credit data. And a real interesting mix of states, some that are fairly new to collecting non-credit data and others that have been doing it for a while and trying to refine and, really all leaning into kind of sharing practices with our national learning community. So we're thrilled that we were able to start this off with some support from NSF and building that out with support from Gates and from Strata Foundation and working with a wonderful group of partners, research partners from around the country at universities, including Mark D'Amico, who's going to be sharing work later on in this meeting, as well as Dee Zhu from UC Irvine and Peter Barr, who formerly at University of Michigan, now at Strata Foundation. And again, of course, all of our wonderful state partners really have helped contribute a lot to this effort and building towards a taxonomy that we're happy to share with you all today. So just reviewing the sort of what we had in the original data taxonomy, we looked at the kinds of data that were elements that were collected in the states that we worked with and kind of categorize them into a few key areas. The first pertains to the purpose and design of the non-credit program offering. And so this can include a range of different elements that help us better understand what the non-credit offering is. Whether it's field of study, type of non-credit, workforce, avocational or basic skills, the length of the program, the way it's delivered, and even the kinds of credentials that it's associated with. So those all help us better understand the actual educational experience. Of course, there's a lot of important measures that are collected on outcomes. Everyone really wants to know how do participants do after they complete the program? Do they complete it? What are their earnings and employment status, and do they attain non-degree credentials? So there's states are collecting a variety of data elements that pertain to outcomes. But of course, we also care to know about the students themselves, some information on who they are, and whether that be demographics, gender, race, ethnicity, age, other characteristics, as well as identifiers that would help us link individual student information to some of the outcomes data that we care about. And finally, we recognize in that first round of the taxonomy the importance of information on funding, because funding in many ways drives a lot of the data elements that are collected. So looking at what kinds of tuition or funding sources that were associated with the program offering. So that was the sort of the first iteration of the taxonomy. We're really thrilled, with the second phase of this work to be able to learn several important lessons in updating the taxonomy. So across those different buckets, I think there's several key takeaways. There's a lot here. I'll try and just go over some high level findings and hopefully we'll have a chance to take a look at the taxonomy in more depth. One of the key things that we were able to do in this second phase was bring in, like I said, a wider range of different kinds of entities into the mix. And so while the first phase of work was really based a lot in the experiences of community college folks, of systems and agencies, With the second phase, we were able to bring in some other perspectives. So notably, we were able to take a look at the offerings from a Department of Labor perspective in New Jersey. And so that helped us gather, additional kinds of elements that would support knowing more about, for example, student accessibility and student services. Those were some different factors that came through there, as well as different kinds of credential outcomes and whatnot in the outcomes category. Other kinds of information emerged on characteristics of students, for example, as well through that work. And then, I think we certainly realized, in addition to some of the importance of the finance measures, that there are also a lot of important policy and priority measures that would come through as well, in addition to the finance. And so those are very much intertwined with
he told me about it, but yeah, just
so those are some of the key lessons. And again, there's many more that you can take a look at in the report.
Basically a payment method retainer is what they call it. So payment on auto pay. I guess they're trying to get it's basically
get everybody on mute here.
I haven't came on file, I don't know, but if you
so again, just kind of summarizing some of the additions to the second phase of the taxonomy, we were able to add in more information, really expand out some of the categories around student accessibility and student services, and sort of provide more examples. And so the taxonomy itself gives you these broad categories. It also gives definitions and some examples. And so that sort of further fleshed out some of those potential categories. Also, we were able to provide a better range of information on providers and provider in terms of information around their characteristics. As well as a better delineation of kind of those student characteristics, the enrollment demographics, and student identifiers. So certainly being able to add in the perspective of a WIGOA agency really helped to round out the taxonomy and build that out. And then, as I mentioned before, we were able to add in different kinds of policy elements into the section on finance. So what you'll see in this new data taxonomy is really a much larger and robust set of data elements. So we've nearly doubled the elements that are potentially listed, and refined some of the operational definitions. So there's now more than 90 of those. And so again, this is also, just to be clear, that the intention of this is not to say everybody should be collecting all of these elements, but to give some parameters for thinking about, talking about, and conceptualizing what can be measured, and seeing what others are doing, it so that, folks are trying to do this anew to be able to build off of what others are doing and have a point of reference. So we hope that, it provides that useful starting point and refining point for others that are kind of taking a look at things that are already being collected. So, so those are some of the key highlights from the Data Taxonomy 2.0. Again, kind of looking at this, how these all sort of fit in with the taxonomy as I laid out, the purpose and design. As I mentioned, we've added in more information in addition to program length. We also know a little bit more about some of the admissions criteria, some of the eligibility points for students in terms of entering into these programs. We do know, again, more about accessibility for students, and we know more about the kinds of providers and the services that they offer to students. So we can see more examples of those later. Those are some of the new additions. So you'll see those in bold here in this diagram, as well as I said, on the finance, we added in policy as a new vector here. And then in addition to tuition, there's also the element of the cost to the student that's measured in some places. So this sort of just shows us this is kind of an updating and evolving tool that we hope will be useful as folks go forward with this work. I want to share with you again just some examples of what's in the taxonomy that hopefully will make this a useful resource. As you can see, we have these broad categories around types of non-credit data elements, and then there's subcategories within them. And then you can see there are sort of operational definitions that would help you better understand, how to put some of these categories, some of these terms into measurable items. So, for example, non-credit to credit transitions, that's clearly we're looking at whether a non-credit student would enroll in a credit course or a program. We're looking at, a variety of different kinds of labor market outcomes, whether it be pre-employment enrollment employment or post-enrollment employment. And then a lot of these sort of important, outcomes around the non-degree credentials, and some of those can be very tricky to measure, as I know many folks here know, and we've been trying to gather more information on the viability of collecting more of that information. And as a side note, we just completed another a report on occupational licensure, and that is also available on our website to see the availability of outcomes data among states around occupational licensure. So this just gives you an example of kind of what's, again, in the taxonomy. I think one of the important things just to point out here is as we move forward with this, and I know we've been talking with various folks here about sort of where does this taxonomy go from here? One of the really important things is just recognizing there are so many different entities involved in states in this work, whether it be state agencies or, institutions and systems, state departments of labor, universities, apprenticeship agencies, all kinds of different entities within each state's governor's offices. Every state is slightly different. But what we see, is the importance of trying to build up from the experiences of each of these kinds of entities within a state to help kind of build up this taxonomy that will incorporate the perspectives of different kinds of non-degree credentials, the different kinds of institutional entities, into something that could give us a more common language for talking about what non-credit is and how to measure it. Just to give us that commonality. And so, as I said, sort of starting off, this the first taxonomy was really heavily based in the community college data efforts, but we've since then expanded out more into including the Department of Labor perspective. And with our next phase of work, we are going to be expanding into more of the sort of four-year university perspective, as well as looking at apprenticeship and looking at governor's offices and a whole range of other perspectives that can help us really round out our understanding of what non-credit is and how we can measure it. So that's a bit of a crash course on the current report as it's released. Again, I want to summarize one of the, I think, ongoing lessons that we've been learning together on this project is just, when you think about how to do this and really thinking about non-credit data and the development of non-credit data systems is not just a single goal point, but it's kind of an ongoing, evolving journey. And we appreciate everyone sort of being there together on this journey as everyone is trying to figure out how to do this well. And, so as we think about where does that journey begin, based on our reflections of all the states we've worked with and building out the taxonomy, part of it is, just that starting point that we've worked on. And we've done a lot of briefs with states, just inventorying kind of the current data systems, current non-credit data. Let's see what's there. If you have non-credit data, and whether or not, your state has data, you really want to sort of start with the essentials. So figure out what's most important items to collect and build over time. It's hard to kind of get everything you want immediately. So sort of start from what's most important and then build out. Thinking about interconnectivity is super important. We recognize the importance of partnerships and, the fact that to get full data, there's a lot of different entities sometimes that need to come together. So think about a data platform that allows for that interconnectivity. And, hand in hand is, the importance of building up data partnerships to collect outcomes. And again, thinking about engaging in statewide and national data ecosystems as this work is kind of building out simultaneously in all parts of the country, is to really think about how to try and think about that in a kind of a coordinated manner as much as possible. So, so that's kind of a snapshot of the data report, and I'm sharing here a QR code, for the project overall and for this recent report that's been released. We hope that you can take a look at it, download it. It's useful to you, hopefully, and looking forward to feedback and thoughts on that. Just as a side note, too, I don't want to forget to mention, an important piece of this project that's moving forward. I know many of you know this. You've been on meetings before where we've been talking about our state working groups, but I just wanted to mention again that we, in addition to this quarterly learning community that's open to anybody, we have some more focused working groups for state folks only that are convening now, focused on a few key topic areas, including data collection 101, partnerships, and linking to wage or labor market outcomes data. So if folks from states are interested in those working groups, definitely feel free to reach out to me or others on our project team to let us know and get plugged into those. But that aside, I want to get to the really exciting part of today. Instead of me talking about the report, I want to hand things over to my colleague, Mark D'Amico from UNC Charlotte, a key partner on this project, leading a lot of these efforts with me, who authored the Data Taxonomy Report 2.0 and has been working very closely with our state partners. He's going to moderate a discussion with Chris Tingle from Tennessee and Karmen Smith from South Carolina to reflect on the taxonomy report and how they've been using that in their work and just reflect on these conversations more broadly. So I'm going to stop and turn this over to Mark. Look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And I'll just remind folks if you could mute if you aren't speaking. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. So just to reiterate some things that Michelle mentioned, through our work in development of the taxonomy and other reports and products that we've had as a part of this project, none of it happens without the learning that's done with our state partners. So I know Michelle mentioned the 8 states that we've worked with really closely, but it's also important to bring this learning community and our working groups together. So we know that many folks who are on the learning community meeting today are maybe first timers. So I'm so glad you joined us and hope you're interested in the discussion that we have today. So I want to once again just introduce our 2 panel members who we're going to engage with and acknowledge that they are there and a member of teams from their respective organizations, and again, representative of our 8 research partner states. So again, first, Chris Tingle, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Data Strategy with the Tennessee Board of Regents. Thank you, Chris. And Karmen Smith, Senior Workforce and Special Projects Manager with the South Carolina Technical College System Office. So just to get us kicked off, Chris and Karmen, can you share with us some of the history of your states and your agencies' non-credit data collection?
Go ahead, Karmen.
Okay, I was like, you or me, Chris. Okay, so I can start with South Carolina. So we've been on this non-credit data journey, as Mark likes to call it, for probably, I would say maybe about 3 years now. And it really all started when COVID hit, right? And then all of a sudden we had this issue in South Carolina where there were people, they were looking for jobs or they were looking to transition from one job to another. And so the governor's office ended up giving our technical college system $12 million in non-credit only funding that we had to use strictly for short-term workforce education programs. And so with that funding, we discovered that we did not have the data elements that we needed to be able to report out the outcomes for that funding in our normal non-credit reporting structure. We did report on non-credit data in certain elements, but we didn't have others that would help demonstrate, the viability and the importance of non-credit education in our state. And then, after that, we actually received $95 million from the state legislature for workforce education that was credit bearing, but also it included non-credit as well. And so we really the inciting incident for all of our data collection was just a need to be able to tell our story as a result of increased funding and increased accountability from both our governor's office and our state legislature.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. Chris.
Yeah, so I would say that TBR, so just to give everybody some background, the Tennessee Board of Regents is the governing body for 13 community colleges and 24 technical colleges. We call those TCATs, Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology. Historically, we have not collected a lot of non-credit data, but we've really started to kind of coalesce ourselves around the idea of having more robust non-credit data over the last 18 months or so. In the past, it's really been kind of two factors that have kind of led what we have collected. It's been either the funding model for either the TCATs or the community colleges, but also how their data systems are controlled, whether those are institutionally located or located at the system office. So for our TCATs, they don't have any funding related to non-credit data, or at least not recurring funding relating to non-credit data. But because the board is responsible for maintaining a single instance of their student information system, we build all their non-credit programs. We're very hands-on with their student data, both non-credit and for credit. So we have had a limited amount of information on the TCAT side. On the community college side, they do have some funding for non-credit training in the workforce space. But all that is required to get that funding is reporting total contact hours taught by program by the institution. So all of that data is rolled up at the aggregate at the institution and then sent to us and then sent on to the Higher Education Commission at the state. So what we do have is aggregate data about headcount and workforce contact hours, but basically nothing else on the community college side. So certainly as we've gone through this process, we've started to think about how we can bulk that up.
Yeah, thank you both for getting us started. Clearly funding is one of those policy priorities that we think about. It's one of those policy priorities that we've been hearing from all of our research partner states as a potential driver of data and of better data. Just as a follow-up to hearing a little bit about your history, are there some specific policy priorities maybe that you haven't mentioned, whether they be internal or external, that are driving your organization's desire to expand and or improve some of your non-credit data collection?
Yeah, for us in Tennessee, so there's a few things that have come up, like I said, over the last 18 months or so that really kind of started making us think more intently about this. So our current governor is very focused on short-term training programs, and I think everybody on the call has probably heard multiple times in the last year or two quality non-degree credentials, right? So that's really a hot button topic here in Tennessee right now, and we know that we can't fully tell the story of what our colleges commit to the state without knowing more about the non-credit space. So that's certainly been one first and foremost. About a year ago, we had a forum with the employers that we know that hire a lot of students coming from our colleges across the state. And they made it really clear that they didn't see a distinction between for credit and non-credit training. And in particular, if they knew the student had the competencies, and particularly if the student had the competencies demonstrated by some type of industry recognized credential, they were going to hire that student regardless of where the training was taught. So we kind of found ourselves I may be probably going into that. I was surprised by that discussion. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but we were kind of caught a little bit flat-footed in terms of what we knew about our non-credit students. So that's really kind of what's driving us right now.
Yeah, I think for us, we had both a similar situation and maybe a little bit different. So our governor too is very interested in workforce training and outcomes, to the point where we have gotten lots of funding for it, and we're very grateful for that. But in addition, I think we kind of had the opposite reaction from, just the community at large. Was we are actually trying to bolster, I don't want to say legitimacy because that's a strong word, but I think that we wanted to make sure that we standardize certain elements of non-credit education so that we could tell our story better, and so that we could communicate that a student is a student is a student, and we could, show outcomes, and we could show the legitimacy and the robustness of the career paths that we were forging through this non-credit credential path. And so a lot of it, of our, I wouldn't call it policy as much as a desire to be able to tell our story well and to be able to show the work that our technical colleges do on the non-credit side, whether it be work with our businesses or also work with public offerings in the community. And in addition to that, it just helps us to be able to respond to inquiries that we get about our technical college system and things like that, just to have a robust Rolodex of information that we can share with others.
Yeah, Carmen and Chris, as I hear you both talking about specific priorities in your state or questions that you're getting or responses from employers or industry, economic development, you name it, it seems like so many of the situations that you all are explaining and maybe other state partners as well are just really specific to your state and the questions that you get, the priorities that you have. And, it makes me think about the taxonomy, that Michelle just shared that we've developed based on these state partnerships, and that all of the data elements, it's like 90 different data elements now, that it's not that all states, that we're recommending that they have all data elements captured in the non-credit data set, but rather thinking about the main categories and thinking about those data elements that are important to you. So just reflecting on Tennessee and South Carolina, what are some of your current data priorities in terms of improved or expanded non-credit data collection? And then maybe circling back a little bit, what maybe that you've described already drives those specific data priorities? Because I think everyone on this call who may be coming from a state is thinking about their own next steps. So I think hearing about what your specific data priorities are right now, based on what you've shared might be interesting to other folks.
I think for us, on top of just maintaining and reiterating standardization, because, it's only been 3 years since we started even working on these policies, much less implementing them, right? And so it's a process to train all of our community colleges on, exactly what things mean. But outside of that, I think that we're preparing for the potential of workforce Pell. I think we're preparing for IPEDS requirements. And I think that we're also in our dream world that we're working towards on our non-credit data journey, we're also trying to figure out a way that we can form partnerships with licensing organizations so that we can garner more outcomes of licensures. And I know that there are other states on this call that do that. So kudos to you guys. We'll probably be giving you a call.
Yeah, I think in Tennessee, what's been important for us at the board to think about is the fact that we're not in a silo, right? We're one of two higher education systems in the state, both of which share data with the Higher Education Commission and ultimately with our state's P20 system. And we are blessed with, or some might say cursed with, a lot of nonprofit partnering organizations in Tennessee that really, really care about students. And so the process for us, and obviously I think we feel like we have a pretty good grasp on what types of data is needed to answer the questions that are in Tennessee, but we want to make sure that we're talking with those partners. And so we've been scheduling interviews with each of those partners, each of the partnering organization, obviously with the people, the institutions that care about this, the workforce folks, the IR folks, and others, and just kind of getting feedback about the types of things that they want to know about. And that's kind of helped us shape what we think our objectives are, kind of the near-term priorities for data collection. And those have really kind of coalesced around a few items. So one of the things I was excited to see in the non-credit taxonomy 2.0 was kind of this idea of student support for non-credit students. That's one that our schools have talked about a lot. They feel like they've got some things for credit students that are readily accessible, but also thinking about what they can do in that non-credit space. matching the students that are in non-credit programs to our state's labor records. We have a really good partnership with the labor folks in Tennessee, so that we can see how those are impacting placement and wages. And then obviously kind of also the mandatory reporting pieces, right? So like what if the Pell goes through? What if we have to do iPads? Obviously there's some funding requirements there as well. So those are the things that right now we see as our priorities.
Yeah, thank you. So Chris, you brought up the taxonomy. I'm curious, Chris and Carmen, and Chris, if there's anything else that you wanted to share, or we'll let Carmen jump in about how the non-credit data taxonomy has been helpful to your efforts so far. And I do want to acknowledge, I know that we're getting some questions in the chat, which is great, and some hands raised, which is also good. We're going to leave ample time for questions, so we'll get to questions in just a minute. But yeah, if you all could reflect on the taxonomy and how it may be helpful to your efforts now, that'd be great.
Do you have anything else you wanted to share, Chris? But my answer will be brief. So it was pretty convenient when the first iteration of the taxonomy was being written. We were also like embarking on our non-credit data journey. And so I think for us, while we were working through the process with you all doing our state non-credit data project, we were also able to glean from that knowledge and that experience to be able to build some of our processes in South Carolina. And we use it in a multitude of ways now. We use it as a reference guide when we need to figure out what the next step is. I mean, we've tossed around the idea of doing licensure partnerships before, but I think that now that we have a predecessor that we know of and a resource that has done it that we can speak to, I think that gives us, the courage to be able to go ahead and keep walking down the path. And then, to be honest, a lot of times the ways that we use it is when we are trying to do something new, we use it to help, convince those on high that this is something that we need to be doing to make our data better. I mean, for lack of a better term, we use it as a way for us to, I guess, just to be able to share across our organization and other organizations the importance of non-credit data and also the standards that we're adhering to as well.
Yeah, I think in our state, it's really been a tool for organizing the work to an extent. So one of the first things we did when we started thinking about this was convene an internal work group. And as a part of convening that, we sent everybody the first taxonomy and said, read this before you come to the meeting, right? Kind of ground everybody in kind of a common understanding, because we all have very wide range of backgrounds and kind of knowledge of the non-credit space. Then as we've been moving forward and we've been kind of coalescing around the types of information we want, it's helped us to start to convene some work groups that include both stakeholders and internal folks at TBR around some of the things that are categorized in that. So for instance, we're going to have a student outcome working group. We're going to have a purpose and design working group. We're going to have an enrollment and demographic working group, so that we can bring kind of the people that are specialists in each one of those areas together to start to identify the specific fields and information that we want for that area.
Yeah, thank you both. Oh, sorry, Carmen, were you going to add something? I see your mic's open.
Nope.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think inherent in some of the things that you've mentioned is just, how much process and thought and involvement of others goes into some of these decisions. So, I think we're hearing that and having worked on this project with both Tennessee and South Carolina, I just know that how much it takes to engage, to lead to improved data. So again, Chris and Carmen, really appreciate you sharing some of your experiences. I hope that you'll be willing to maybe take some questions from other folks and colleagues here on the call. So we'll invite questions now for Chris, Carmen, for Michelle, anything about the taxonomy and the recent report. So again, thanks, and we'll just jump in. Kim from Louisiana, do you want to jump in with the first comment and/or question?
for, it's kind of a twofold question. You mentioned the separation or in the taxonomy between something that's granted at the institution or the college versus IBC or licensure. So the first, because part of the question is, do you get confirmation that the student obtained the IBC or passed like the licensure exam? And if you do, then the other comment that Chris made was that you collected in prior, I guess, former lifetimes, you collected the hours associated with, and that's all you had. So in light of the conversation you've had with, it sounds like business and industry, all they care about is the credential. They don't care about the skill set and the credential. They don't care about the training. So then if all they do is care about the skill set and the training, then how important is collecting those clock hours, those contact hours? Because we try to, I think a lot of us think in the credit space where we build up to an FTE and then there's some type of funding per FTE, but I'm just wondering, like, the hours related to the course, IBC or licensure, like how would you handle if it differed vastly from one of your TCATs, I believe, to another? I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for, and Karmen might have, because I know that she said she talked a little bit more about how to collect that information. So we're not there yet in terms of collecting those industry credentials. That's, to me, one of the main challenges, right, is the fact that that information is not automatically reported to the institution. And I don't know yet how exactly we're going to overcome that. I think Karmen's idea about getting some of those partnerships with some of those granting bodies is really important for us. I don't know that we'll ever stop collecting the contact hours from the FTE piece, but right now, the reason that is the primary funding mechanism for community colleges is because it's easily collected, I guess, for lack of a better way to think about it. So I could see us changing if we ever had more information about those outcomes pieces, but for us right now, that's all we really have available.
Yeah, Kim, I think for us, it's important to collect contact hours just because one of the ways that we monitor, I guess, anomalies in our reporting is we test for contact hours. So that's one of the reasons we do. Some of our funding statewide is also tied to contact hours. So it's important for our colleges to collect that. But in terms of the industry recognized credentials and licensures, we are aiming to form those partnerships with licensing bodies. But for right now, the colleges just have to collect that data organically. So one of the requirements for them to complete the course is actually to come back to the college and say, okay, I got my license on this date and this is my certificate number and all that kind of stuff. So before they're issued a completion certificate or credential from the college, they actually have to come back and self-report. So that's the way that we've managed that thus far. But of course, there are downfalls to that approach. And so we would like for things to be a little bit more cohesive across the state. So that's sort of our next iteration of data improvement plans for non-credit.
So you don't even have, like, what we were told is that sometimes it takes some time between test dates or licensure pass dates. So the reality of you saying that them getting it before the training's over may not be practical. So you still expect the student to come back and let the school know that they did in fact?
Yes.
Okay.
After the fact.
How long do you allow this? And I'm so surprised our LCTCS person isn't speaking up about it.
You said how long have we allowed?
How long do you let them, like, before they come back and tell you?
That's a good question. I think it probably depends on the license that they're obtaining. But that's just what I've heard. I mean, I don't work at a college, so it's a little hard for me to know exactly, like, we don't have standards per se. I think that's what we're trying to establish is a standard. So we're just doing the best we can right now. I mean, it's really just a grassroots effort, and we had to have some sort of incentive for the student to come back and self-report that they had completed. So that's, or they call, they do, I mean, all those organic collection methods, like that's what we have to do right now. And so I think we're trying to move away from that as much as we possibly can, knowing that it's not the most reliable data source.
Yeah, Karmen, I would piggyback on that to say that it's hard to even convince short-term program completers on the credit side to come back for a state-recognized credential out there. So I'm not sure how attractive it is to expect a student to make a special effort to come back and receive whatever is non-credit completion credential. Like, my doubts are to what degree it can be used for anything if there is
Right,
a license or credential out there.
right.
Do you have any statistics as to how many of them actually come back and report that out of expected?
I don't have them on hand. No, I don't. Because again, this is something that we're moving towards. And like, I don't want you to be mistaken, like that this is a statewide policy that we like require all of our colleges to have the students come back and report this. It's just a matter of the college having it for its own sake, having the
Right.
data. So we're moving towards a statewide interest in the outcomes of licensures.
And I think, Karmen, what you're sharing, and thank you, Vlad, from Iowa, for chiming in there, as well as Amy, another one of our research partners from Louisiana, chiming in on a question. It's a learning community. Everyone is welcome to participate and share that information. But just thinking about Karmen, what you're sharing, how maybe some things aren't necessarily required at this point, but some colleges are doing it, but you're trying to move toward this. I think that was your language. I mean, I think that speaks to the overall nature of this non-credit data, and this journey that we talk about is really wrestling with some of these issues and thinking through engaging with colleges, using resources to move toward some regularity. And I do want to go back. Tom Wico asked a question about what can you tell us about data completeness and data quality in your plans for these? And I think, Karmen, actually what you were just saying, and Chris, what you were alluding to a little bit, is that there is this idea of expansion. We talk about adding data elements as a part of this project rather, but there's also a big part around even having more complete and more accurate data collections with the data elements that you are capturing. So I wonder, Chris and Karmen, if anyone else wanted to chime in, just thinking about completion and data quality, how do those fit into some of your priorities right now?
Yeah, and it's been a big topic of conversation between myself and the workforce office at TVR, because I think we're trying to find the right balance, honestly, between flexibility for the institutions and standardization, data collection, et cetera, that we want for the system. I think the way we're kind of thinking about this right now is, we much prefer the carrot than the stick. We'll use the stick if we really have to, but when we first started collecting record level data from the TCATs for non-credit, we did a pretty big tour of institutions and Teams and Zooms and what have you, kind of talking about how we use that information when we have it. So things like social security numbers, things like birth dates, names, et cetera, how we can make use of that information to better support the institution, right? So our TCATs in particular don't have any internal research departments. We're really that at the board. So if they want things like kind of placement rates, wages, outcome information for those students, they really have to work with us to report that. And I would say we get that probably in 80 to 85% of cases. We get a social security number. There are times when the institutions tell us that the employer, if it's a contract or sponsored training, the employer just does not have an interest in sharing that information with us, and that's fine. We think we've done the best we can. So we anticipate doing that with the community colleges, going through the process of explaining how we use that information, why it's important that they work with us on standardization and those types of things. And hopefully we can get a similar rate, but we know it's never going to be perfect, I think.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, we require a social security number for students that are receiving scholarship funds so that we can track the employment outcomes and all those things for the student. Completeness is very important to us, though, to the degree that we have our state board has now instituted a performance measure around non-credit data, which is actually pretty exciting for us because it just shows a movement towards, making this a priority statewide. But our colleges, it's actually tied to their state funds that they receive, the completeness, the accuracy, and the timeliness of their non-credit data for our reporting purposes. And so it's very important, and that's just a recently instituted policy this academic year. So we're definitely serious about it, and we're moving towards greater completeness and accuracy.
So they, SSN required, or, I mean, the accuracy of the data, I guess, is the thing, because we do get the same kind of pushback for the contract training, where they're just not going to share that information. And, you know, like you pointed out, if you're not getting a scholarship, it's like, how can you make me give you something I'm not, you know, that you can take it, you know, whatever, we get the pushback as well. So does that affect the metrics? Because Louisiana is in the process of adding this to our formula as a formula metric as well. And I do worry about that because anything in our formula gets audited, has to be audited, and they take random samples and all that. And so I'm just trying to get ideas of this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's worth noting that we're not requiring, maybe what you're thinking the requirement is a little bit layer deeper than maybe what we're requiring for performance funding specifically. Most of it just has to do with, like, you know, is it on time? Is it, you know, and it's not quite as like, did the student get a job because of this class?
Gotcha.
For each. It's so we've tried to balance it in a way to where it's attainable for the colleges, but it also shows that it's a priority that you need to get this information to us as quickly as possible.
And I think this speaks to, you know, just one of the data element issues, and I appreciate we got a question about Social Security number, and that's what Amy responded to. And thank you, Cassie, for being here and for responding as well. Another partner from South Carolina. You know, in the taxonomy, we do under the enrollment and demographics section. If you would go to the appendix, and maybe we could drop the link to that in the chat again. If there's someone on the ERC team that can do that, or I can do it in just a minute. But there are a number of potential identifiers and identifiers that states use, Social Security number being one. Of course, we know some of the advantages to using Social Security number, especially connecting with outcomes, but also driver's license numbers, state ID numbers. That's a new addition to the Taxonomy 2.0. Institutional identification number is used in several states, in addition to name and birth date, which can be really helpful, especially when connecting non-credit data, say to clearinghouse data. So, you know, again, while Social Security number would have real advantages, I think one of the principles that we think about is sort of where we started our conversation, which was, what are your priorities? What are the data elements that your state needs? And what's the appropriate starting point or next step for states? So I think, you know, that's always one of the things to, or maybe those are a few of the things, you know, to keep in mind as states are thinking about those priorities. So we have maybe about 5 more minutes if another question comes in, but Chris and Karmen, maybe, you know, one thing I'm curious about is, you know, we know this isn't easy because there's so much interest in improving non-credit data. And if it were easy, it would have been done probably more completely before this. What maybe is one of the challenges that you all have faced or are currently facing, and maybe a strategy for overcoming that challenge? Because you know, having worked with so many states and talking with so many others, I think some of the challenges, you know, really span the state. So curious about your thoughts, maybe Chris, then Karmen.
I think we've hit on probably the biggest one right now for us, which is where we're going to draw the line in the sand on what's required and what we're also requiring schools to be standardized on. But I think just to add another one that I think everybody on this call likely feels is capacity, right? So we've received no additional personnel, no additional funds. Right now we're doing this, you know, based on just our absolute desire to have this information. But we hope to be able to make a case as we start to see the results of this, the fruits of our labor, to start to build out, some funding and some capacity. But right now we are doing this with zero additional FTE.
For us, because our system is, how do I put this? Each technical college is more like its own autonomous business, and the system office is there to support the technical colleges, but we don't always have it's not a centralized system is the best way to put it. It's more like a federation of, different colleges. They all have their own like territories and things. And so I think for us, when you're undergoing a project that spans a statewide effort, there is always so much disparity in resources, in ideology, in systems that people are using. I mean, it goes all the way from the philosophical right down to the practical of, how many staff members does a college have? How much resources do they have? And so I think for us, the disparity in between those has been tough. And we've tried to approach that in several different ways. One of them being just exploring what it would look like to move to a single non-credit data system statewide. And we've actually spoken with quite a few of you on the call today. So thank you for supporting us in our efforts to move potentially towards a non-credit data system. But I think, yeah, for us, it's just about, the way that we are structured. It has pros and cons, but I think in terms of trying to centralize process, it can be a little sticky. So what we're trying to do to overcome that is to create a single system that's attractive for everyone to use, that integrates well with platforms that everybody's using, and that can potentially be supported at the system office level to ensure regularity and standardization across all 16 of our colleges.
Thank you, Karmen. I will say what I hear a lot less of in conversations these days is, oh yeah, that college still uses Excel. So, so I mean, I think we're seeing movements in terms of consistency and systems, but data systems are currently one of those important enablers that we have written about in several of our reports, and I know that this learning community has been, in the working groups, the state working groups have been a great support to many states as they've thought about just even housing data and what that looks like. And we often look to our friend Amy from the Louisiana Community Technical College system and how they've moved toward for banners, say for both the credit and non-credit, and how important that data integration has been. So I don't know if Amy, I saw you opened up your camera there. If you wanted to just chat for just a second about that, that would be great.
I mean, it takes a lot of work to do if you're gonna do it. But it is worth it, I think, in the end, to try to get your data into one system. And I've heard a lot about like funding formula and stuff like that, and you've got to have some type of carrot, whether it's in your funding formula or so like at LCTCS, it is not a part of our funding formula at all, but we just happen to have another pot of money that we reward our chancellors on. And it's also a part of our chancellor evaluation. So it's about completers. So if you want your completers to be counted, they must be in the system of record. So even without money associated with this at all, the carrot for us is something a little bit different. So it's like a larger strategic plan, and then how are you contributing to those completers? The non-credit completers are a part of that. And we do have colleges who try to still track things on spreadsheets, and we're like, that's a beautiful spreadsheet. It is not in our system of record, and we are not counting it. And so that's kind of where we are. I will also say it's a constant evaluation too of like using the system of record. So because we've done this probably for the last 2 years full-fledged, but we still have colleges who push back on using Banner as a system of record. And so it's a constant like, okay, let's evaluate what are people doing today? How are things getting in Banner? What are you collecting? What are the barriers? But you have to do that both for credit and non-credit because it's one system that we're trying to use for both types of students. So I don't know what else to add there, but it can work if you want it to work, but you do have to put some parameters around certain things, and you do have to have some type of carrot to get people to do it, even if it's not financial.
Yeah, Amy, that's helpful. I think, just this idea that, that some of these decisions and processes, developing processes, implementing systems, it's challenging and it takes time and takes real deliberate effort. So I just want to thank Chris and Karmen, especially for being such great sports and sharing so much about Tennessee and South Carolina on our call today, and for everyone else who had a question or chimed in to provide some content. We really we use the phrase learning community really intentionally because we want to bring folks together to exchange ideas, and I think all of our research partners really exemplify this. So again, thanks, Chris and Karmen. Michelle, would you like to share any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, that's great. I again, just like you, Mark, want to thank everybody for joining us and for our panelists and all of our state partners. And just I put a quick note in the chat just to remind folks that our next quarterly learning community meeting is on June 9th. It's going to be at a slightly different time. It's a little bit earlier, 1 o'clock Eastern. And we're going to tackle, actually to Greg's question, a little bit about sort of some of the questions and issues that come up around reporting in the context of WIOA. So that should be a great discussion. And we're looking forward to that. More information will come on that. So to everybody on this list, so definitely be in touch if you're interested in being part of that discussion, or engaging with us on the research, or engaging with us on the working groups with our state partners. So thanks, everyone.